Thanks for joining me on the Sketchnote Mini Workshop. I hope you follow along with me. If you've got paper and pen, please take a moment and pause the video if you like. Get paper and pen so you can follow along. We're going to be doing some drawing, and it's very important because this is an opportunity for you to learn some really basic drawing skills that may help you, especially those of you who feel like you're not artists, and because of this you're not able to do sketchnoting. I think that's not true at all, and I think you should be able to do sketchnoting wonderfully. So follow along. So first I have to start with the backstory. 10 years ago I started this sketchnoting journey. I started it because I was in so much pain with my note-taking approach. I was very good at note-taking and I hated taking notes. It was a really terrible combination. The problem that I faced was I'd come to this place in my life where I was taking notes of everything that I heard. I felt that I needed to take notes of every detail. And in order to do that, I had to have large A4 size notebooks with lined pages. And then I used a pencil because I was concerned that if I made a mistake, I should have the opportunity to go back and fix that mistake. Well, the reality of this was that I didn't actually review the notes that I took. I wrote all these detailed notes and it was very stressful, but I never went back and looked at them. So the solution for me was, how do I change this situation? My choice was, as a designer, to put limitations on myself to see if I could find a way out of this problem. And what I did was I switched over to a smaller notebook, partly because I thought that if I could limit the pages that I could write on, I wouldn't write so much. And then I switched to a pen so that anything that I wrote, I would have to commit to. I'd have to be very careful about it. And the combination of limited space and committing to a pen combined to refocus my thinking towards listening for key information, big ideas. So instead of writing everything down, in this case, I actually just wrote down the things that were valuable to me, the things that I felt I could make use of. In a conference, I would just go and listen for those key ideas. And it worked so well that it freed me up, not having to write everything down, to actually start drawing things, doing lettering, enjoying the process of note-taking again, to really listen to what the speaker was saying, and then capturing it in a fun way. Next thing you know, I was doing it regularly. I was invited to come to conferences, eventually hired to go to conferences. This led to an opportunity to write one book. The book, the Sketchnote Handbook, sold really well. It's in many languages. And then I was able to write a second book called the Sketchnote Workbook. So both are out and doing well, both bestsellers. And then it's given me opportunities to speak to people like you and encourage you to do sketchnoting, that it's definitely possible and that you can do it too. So as you can imagine, sketchnoting really changed my life, not only from improving my note-taking, but then seeing other people having their note-taking improved as well and having a door open for them just like it was for me. So you may be asking, if you've not heard what sketchnotes are, what are these things that I'm talking about? Well, I like to call them Notes Plus. I call them Notes Plus because you're not really throwing away the notes you take now. You're still writing notes with text in the same way you did before. Now, you may be writing a little bit fewer notes because you're listening more intently at the information, but you're simply writing and then you're adding lettering, so you're emphasizing some words, making them bigger. And then you're using drawings. It could be drawings of the speaker, drawings of the concepts you're hearing, or you may have a selection of icons that you use regularly that you build over time that help you organize your information so that you can scan back through it and draw value from it at a future time. And then finally, because you're not writing as much and you're focusing on the big ideas, you're really capturing, you're listening very carefully, and you're applying in the moment and making choices about what to remember by writing it down and what to let go. So many of these conferences we attend have their sessions recorded, so in some ways it doesn't even make sense to record every word. It's much more important to find the things that are valuable to you, and this is a way to do it by taking Notes Plus or sketchnotes. So here are some samples, just a few samples to show you what sketchnotes can look like. These are sketchnotes from sermon notes that I take. So I attend a church every Sunday and I look at it as an opportunity to practice every week and try out new ideas. So you can see that I've got a sketchnote of a sermon here talking about the book of Mark and sort of capturing these concepts that I was hearing in real time while I was listening, drawing pictures of people and concepts of the layout of a page and other information that was really interesting to me, as well as text. So you'll see that there's a fair amount of writing here as well as drawing. So I don't throw away the writing, I simply add visuals to it and make them work together. Another sample is of idea mapping. So this is what I do at work very much as a UX designer, working with software teams on whiteboards or with large screens that I can write on. And what we do is we take concepts, requirements for software, and we map them out on the board, and we work together to imagine what a solution to these problems could be. In this case, I had just picked up an iPad Pro and a pencil, and I was observing the things that I felt like could be improved, like a screw-on cap so you wouldn't so easily lose it, or maybe the charger's actually inverted so I can use any lightning cable to charge it, and maybe that the length is a little bit shorter so it's easier to put in my pocket. So that's an example of what idea mapping can look like. This is an example of capturing documentation in the moment. This was a latte art throwdown that I attended and was a judge for. And what I did is I captured the criteria for judging the coffees, as well as the action that was happening during the event, the making of the coffee, as well as the bracket of the people competing against each other for the best latte artwork, finally resulting in one winner at the very end. So again, even unusual things can provide opportunities to do sketchnoting and capture information that's valuable to you in a way that maybe you couldn't have imagined if you didn't give it a try. Travel experiences are also a valuable thing that you can do. I did this many years ago, and I traveled with my family to Washington, D.C., and what we did is we went around the city and just experienced the city together. It wasn't practical to sketchnote in my book in the moment because it was just too busy with children and travel and so forth. So what I did was I took notes during the day of the things that really stood out, took photos with my camera on my phone, and then at the end of the night when the kids were in bed, I sat at the hotel desk, and with my notebook, I reconstructed the day using my notes and the images, putting them together in sketchnotes. So this is definitely something you can do as well, to document an experience of almost any kind. It doesn't have to be travel. And to prove that, another way that you can capture experiences is the food that you're eating. So I really enjoy when I go to memorable dinners, or dinners that I hope are memorable, to sketchnote them. In this one, I happen to have my daily diary along, but I made use of 2 pages to capture some Thai food that I had in New York City with my wife. So again, it's just an opportunity to remember the moment with drawings and writing. And in this case, you'll notice the quality of the drawings isn't very detailed. It's very much impressionistic and loose. And really, all it's doing is capturing that moment in time in my impression. So when I look at this image, I remember the moment. I remember what it was like in the restaurant and the food we had and the experience. It's a sort of a marker that brings that memory back to life. And that's the value of sketchnotes of experiences. So ultimately, sketchnotes are designed to capture your thinking. It's a way of capturing your thinking in a physical way, whether it's pen and paper, or even a digital way if you're using some kind of a digital tool to capture those ideas. It doesn't really matter. It's still the same principles applied in different ways. So I like to think of sketchnotes as much more like a pickup truck than a Corvette. A Corvette I see as like, fancy art, things you see in a museum. Of course, they're very important. I love artwork. I think art is important for our lives, but I think there's a place for something practical like a pickup truck, something you can throw, dirty boots in and put your dog in, or go camping in, climbing in the mountains with it, or something that you wouldn't take a Corvette in, or a sports car in that kind of a situation. So think of it that way. So ultimately, if there's one thing you take away from this session, it's that ideas, not art. So we're focusing on capturing and communicating ideas. If you're not a great artist, that's okay. It's not required for sketchnoting. If you are a good artist and you can do visual drawing very well, that's just an advantage that you have. But ultimately, you have to focus on capturing those ideas. So let's get started. Now, this is where I want you to take your pen and paper, or your computer tablet and pen, whatever it is that you're capturing, and follow along with me. So the first thing I had to decide was, how would I communicate the idea of sketchnoting unless people had some comfort in drawing? And what I discovered after years in the visual thinking community, that many people had different ways of expressing a visual way of taking down drawings. Some use many objects. I boiled it down to 5 elements of drawing. And these elements I see as a square, a circle, a triangle, a line, and a dot. And the concept was these basic building blocks allow me to build almost anything I can imagine by just putting them together, almost like Lego blocks. And what that does is it makes it easier for me to imagine drawing things when it's not so much a concern about perfect proportion or making details ideal or exactly what I see. It's more an approximation. It's a representational way to take down image ideas and make them into drawings. So why don't you follow along as I draw, and you'll see what I mean. So first of all, if you imagine a house, you could probably get away with simply drawing a square and putting a triangle on top. That would certainly be enough that you would be able to do, and somebody would understand what you're meaning. Now, of course, having the word house underneath the drawing of the house certainly helps, and that is the key idea of sketchnoting. You're combining the power of words and images together. But what's kind of cool about this is you don't have to be limited to just those simple objects. What if I drew another rectangle and a line across and maybe a little dot for a doorknob? Now I have a door on my house. I can certainly put a square in the upstairs and make a window. Finally, I can use a rectangle on the roof to make a smokestack and even have a squiggly line, single line to make smoke. Now the same goes for a book. So if I wanted to draw a book, I would simply draw a rectangle like this, and then maybe a line down the middle. And that would probably be enough to communicate that idea. However, again, we can add more detail. So I can put another line below like so, connect it to the upper part. Now I've got a little bit of depth. And now I can do things like I can put lines down the left page to suggest writing or text. On the right, I can use a rectangle or square to indicate an image. Maybe it's an image of a mountain, so I use a triangle. And then maybe another line below. So you're representing the idea of a book with writing and images on it. It just adds a little bit more detail. The next one I'm going to show you is coffee. So it might be very tempting to, in this case, draw something in 3 dimensions using circles and things like that. But I recommend, if you can get away with drawing something in two-dimensional space, like from the side, that you do that, because it just makes your life easier. So in this case, I'm drawing just 2 rectangles, one a little bit smaller underneath. And the idea about these is the coffee cups you see that stack up in, say, a cafeteria. And then you simply add a handle on the side. And then on top, you can do something like, again, our vapor coming off. And that can suggest that it's hot coffee. What's really interesting about this approach is, of course, the word coffee supports the image. I can cross that out and simply write tea. And now it's a teacup. So again, this combination of images and drawing together make it very flexible. Finally, I have a little dog named Rufus. And if I draw this for my children, they immediately know who I'm drawing and who I'm talking about. It's just the simple circle, triangle, and then some shapes around, and that's Rufus for me. So that's a really quick way to draw a dog. And finally, a hamburger. Imagine again, instead of worrying about making circles and proportions and getting lost in that, think about this in a two-dimensional way instead of 3-dimensional. So if you look at the side of a burger, it would start with a rectangle at the bottom. Another rectangle, maybe you fill that in, there's your patty. For some reason, I tend to draw Big Mac, so I put the bread in the middle. And then another burger here. Maybe some squiggly lines, that's my lettuce. And then finally, then the top would be a half circle bun for the very top. And then maybe, if it's fancy, there's sesame seeds and then a little toothpick with a flag to sort of finish it off. So again, how simply can you draw something is very valuable when you're trying to move fast and you're taking notes. This is an interesting way to think about using these very simple shapes to draw. So what's really interesting is you start doing this work, you end up with something called a visual library. And that's that as you draw more and more objects and you start to do them again and again, they get memorized. Or you can put them in the back of your notebook so that if you need to refer to them, you can find them again. A really handy resource that you may or may not know about is called the Noun Project. So if you're interested in ideas for ways to express things as icons, that's a really helpful resource where you can take ideas and use those to draw images. But in this case, just follow along with me and we're going to do some more drawing. So a fish can be as simple as this simple shape that you may have seen, 2 intersecting curves. What's interesting is you can continue. You can close off the end, and now you've got a tail. I can put an eye, smiley face. I can put fins on him. And now I've got a little fish. Maybe there's one other curve for his gills. So a really simple way to draw a fish. This is a simple way that I've learned to draw a bird. I start with an oval and a line and another oval or circle. So that's his head and his body. Off the body, I put bird feet, just like that. I put a triangle on his head for his beak and a little dot for his eye, and then a curve like this for his wing. And finally, a little triangle for his tail. So again, I'm trying to find what's the most optimal way that I can draw this image that gets the idea across, but is quick to draw. That's really the ultimate goal with this approach. A camera. So if we draw again, the most simple thing I can do is a rectangle and a circle. I probably could stop there. Maybe I would add another rectangle up on top. That would be the minimum for a camera. But you can, again, add more detail. So I can close off the top here and the bottom. Maybe I'm imagining this could be a 1970s style camera. So I've got the leather. And then in the middle, maybe I draw another circle. And then finally, I can put a smaller circle here. And when I fill in this lens, it almost looks like a shine on the lens. It gives it a little bit of three-dimensionality. Pizza, you might be tempted to simply draw a rectangle or a triangle. But I think in this case, using a little bit of a curve suggests that this piece of pizza comes from a circle, right? So it's going to fill out if you put all the pieces side by side. Another way to reinforce that imagery is if you're drawing, let's say, pepperoni pizza. Maybe the pepperonis actually are cut off from the side of it, like this. And then finally, a submarine, you can draw sort of a rounded edge tube, almost like a cigar, something like that. On the top, there's something called the conning tower, which is where the sailors climb up and down. You can have a little periscope so they can see what's happening. On the back, a square, and then a couple of ovals for the propellers, and then a little line to suggest that they're going through the water. And then you can also do a little thing like a torpedo tube and maybe some lines and show a little torpedo coming to hit the pizza. So you can have a little fun with that. Again, notice how we're using really simple objects to draw here. We're not doing anything too super complex. So if you start thinking in this way, it's kind of a fun game to see how simply you can draw things with these basic shapes. So icons, I wanted to share with you some icons that I like to use in my note-taking at work. So sometimes when I'm at work, I'm taking notes from a meeting that I'm in. And I use these images within my notes, within my text, to help me scan through and find actions. Because ultimately, the notes that I'm taking need to be turned into actions so that I can do work for my clients and my colleagues. The first one I like is the clock. And that is basically a circle like this, and then the hands of the clock. Now, a lot of times I use this for deadlines. So a lot of times I'll put the actual time of the due date in there. So if it's due at 3 o'clock, I might write that in there as just a reminder. But you could certainly add, 3 p.m. to that note with that image. I like using 2 stars. I keep my hierarchy really simple. So it's a regular star and then an asterisk. Sometimes I'll fill it in. I sort of look at this as level 1 and this is level 2. And it keeps my structures somewhat flat. So I only have 2 levels that I typically use. If I need to go to a 3rd level, maybe I would use a circle or something, but it helps me not to get too deep in my structure when I take notes so that I focus on the content and not get too worried about organizing it in the moment. I like using to-dos in my note-taking in meetings, and what I'll do is I'll do a square like this. If it's a project that I've already begun, I might put a dot in the middle, and what's nice about the little dot is you can do things like this. Let's say you started a project and you complete it. Well, you can check it off right on top of the dot. Or if you started the project and you decide, I'm not going to do that, you can cancel it. And finally, if you've got a dot in the middle to suggest you've started it, you can draw an arrow like this and then delegate that to someone else. A lot of times I'm in meetings and I hear ideas based on discussions we're having or ideas that pop up in my head. And I like to use the light bulb icon so I can scan through and find those ideas quickly after the meeting and then turn those into action. And then finally, if I'm seeing scope creep or some problem that I'm worried about, I might use an alert symbol just as a way to indicate that. And then when I need to deal with that, I can scan through again the notes, take action, and move forward. So drawing letters, I think this is really helpful for those of you who want to get bold letters, but maybe you're worried about the time. There's a couple of reasons why these methods are beneficial. Is they're very fast and they're also easy. So in this case, let's do I-S-A. And what I do is I teach the two-line method, which is basically you take the words that you've drawn, and you draw a line on the parallel right next to it, just like this. And then you cap the ends. Basically what you're doing is you're creating a template for yourself to fill in. The beauty of this is when you fill it in, no one's going to know like where the template was. And let's say in this case, I fill in the S, I can see already that there's some issues with that, which is okay. I'll continue filling it in. And now is the time when I can come in and fix things. Like if I want to make this a little bit thicker, I can do that. And clean up the edges a little bit, and now I've got a nice bold letter, but it's really quick. The beauty of this approach is you can use the single line if you're in a hurry, and don't worry about making it double, and come back after the talk or whatever the notes are you're taking and fill in that letter and make it bold again. Or you can even do it a week later or a month later or a year later. Once the letter is in place, you can double it really easily, so it's a convenient way to do that work. The second one I'll teach you is called the three-line method. For this one, I'm simply going to draw an H because it demonstrates the concept. So I would start with the H like this. Like on the other one, I would draw a line on one side. But the beauty of the three-line method is you can get very bold letters by drawing a line on the other side. Again, you cap the ends, right? Just like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, move one over, and then you'll see now I can fill it in, and you'll see what the filled in one looks like compared to the template. And again, what you're doing here is you're building a template for yourself. And if it's imperfect, you just tune it up. No one's going to know because you're filling in the template and it's covered up. So all your secret is hidden that way. So it's just a very quick way to do lettering that helps you capture things and emphasize words that you think are very important. So drawing people, there's two different ways I like to show drawing people. One is called the Dave Gray method. And Dave suggests that if you start with the body first and then the legs, you can get a lot of expression. So in this case, we'll do a body as a rectangle and two legs, and then the feet as just ovals. Now what you can do then is you can make the arms lines as well. You can curve them. I like to do almost like Lego hands on there, really simple. And then finally, a neck and a head. Now here, of course, you can add more detail. You can have, a face on there or something. You can add more detail to the body if you like. What I really like about this is how quickly I can draw people standing. So if I want to do a crowd, it's not too hard. And you'll notice that sometimes I'll do a straight line for feet. That's fine too. And you can do all kinds of different, positions if you like. Somebody rowing a boat, right? So there's somebody rowing a boat. So again, you can do all kinds of different shapes. The other person that I like to share is called the star person. This is a little bit different. So you start with the head first, and then you do the 4 points of a star as a body, like so. You just connect it back to the circle. And then you can do things like give pants, again, you can give that personality. You can also make really tall, thin people by simply stretching the star out like so. Sometimes I'll draw the head second. And then my favorite of all, my friend Michael Clayton taught me this way of drawing a star person. So you make a really big guy like this. Put a little thing on here. And now he's star person, sumo person. So we got a sumo wrestler that quickly. So again, use these really simple ways to draw people, to capture people in your imagery. If you're not an artist, this gives you a way to express people, and it's got a little bit more personality, and it's a little bit more body than a thin stick person might be when you compare that. All right, now listening concepts. These are things, I think that listening is actually the secret weapon of sketchnoting. I think listening is more important than drawing in many ways. Now, drawing is, of course, important to capture the ideas, but I think you can have bad drawings but good listening and have great sketch notes. Where I don't think it works the other way. If you have great drawings but there's no listening, there's not a lot of meat to that sketch note. So the first thing that I suggest is you need to listen for keywords and phrases. So there's certain things that you'll hear. Sometimes they're repeated, so they're repeated many times. You start getting a feeling this thing must be important if it's being said again and again. But you start getting a picture by scanning through and listening for keywords and the things that are being said. You start making an image in your head and you start analyzing when you listen and you hear these things coming through. The second thing I would say is verbatim is okay, but I think interpretation is better, because I think when you interpret things, you internalize it in your mind and you start to understand and sort of turn it around in your head, even very briefly, and understand what that concept is. When you simply write verbatim, you don't really buy into the idea. You're just simply writing down what you hear, and it doesn't have as much meaning, so you're not fully understanding that concept. So I think it's really important that you interpret things. In this case, the example is I can simply write down what an iPhone 5S is, but it's much more impactful if I draw the different parts, the body of the 5S and the brains of the 6S or whatever it is these days. I love it when you add opinion or analysis. Of course, the facts are important. They're a starting point, but opinion is very important because it lets me see what it is that you're thinking about it, or it reminds you when you look at your own notes what you're thinking about in that moment, so you can reconstruct those concepts, put yourself in the same place, and hopefully get that same information and value from the notes as when you were taking them months or years later. And finally, listen between the lines. Not everything is told to you directly. You have to listen and sort of put things together and start seeing the way things fit together. And then you read between the lines. So, it's not you, it's me. Actually, it's you. So now we're going to make stuff. And what we're going to make are sketchnote idea maps. We made a mention of these earlier in the session, and we talked about how important they are for me as a UX designer when I work with developers to map out ideas. I think this is probably one of the most valuable tools that I could share with you as designers, is this way to sketchnote idea maps on paper, on an iPad, and with a pencil, or on a whiteboard. It doesn't really matter what the surface or the materials are. It's more about this communication style. And in this case, I'm going to challenge you to do a personal idea map to sort of experience what this feels like. So why would you create idea maps? Well, it's very important that to get a mental overview of what it is that you're trying to understand. It really is a way of processing the information. And then you can look at the information at different levels. So you can look in fine detail at one or two things, or you can look at the whole thing from a super high level, from 50,000 feet up. And then you can start looking at how things fit together. When you map things on paper or whiteboard or chalkboard, whatever it is, you can start to see how pieces fit together in a different way than when it's just inside your head or in a computer program. I think it's really valuable and a good skill to have. So what we're going to do is, one of my favorite exercises to do in the Sketchnote Mini Workshop is the treehouse exercise. And what we're going to do is we're going to have 2 sessions for you where you draw a treehouse. Now, I'm going to have to trust that you'll time yourself. I keep it time boxed simply because it forces you to keep moving. If I didn't have a time box on this activity, you might wander off and not really do a whole lot. You might spend too much time on one thing. The limited time actually forces you to process information and work quickly. So what I want you to do is find some kind of a timer. It can be on your phone, it can be a kitchen timer, whatever it is, to alarm you when 5 minutes are up. And what I want you to do is keep it rough and loose. What I would like you to do is draw a treehouse. Imagine the treehouse that you always wanted as a child, or maybe you've never imagined having a treehouse. Maybe now is the first time you've thought of it. This is your opportunity to explore treehouses. It doesn't have to be beautiful, but I think it's really helpful if you can process through this activity. And we're going to have 2 time box windows, each of 5 minutes. The reason I do this is after the first 5 minutes, you may have had some other ideas come into your head as you were drawing, and you may want to decide to go in a different direction for your second 5 minutes. What this does is it allows you to make a shift if you want. Now, of course, it's just fine if you were working on your treehouse for the first 5 minutes and you want to spend the second 5 minutes to improve that house. That's just fine. What this does, though, is it gives you options. So if there was some great idea that you came upon as you were exploring and you want to shift gears, now you can do that. So one final note before we get started. I want to see more treehouse and less tree. When I first ran these exercises, Some people came up and they had beautifully drawn trees and no houses because they were so focused again on the tree before they even got to the house. So if you like, you can even operate with the idea that the tree is implied. You can simply draw the house and we'll understand that there's a tree supporting it in some way or another, unless, of course, that's critical to the design. So what I want you to do now is stop this recording, pause it, and then turn on your timer for 5 minutes and start drawing your treehouse. You can use all the symbols and the lettering and the drawing skills that I taught you in the session: square, circle, lines, triangles, and dots. You can use people, you can use icons, you can use any of these objects to build your treehouse. And then after 5 minutes, I want you to stop drawing, sort of look at what you've done, and make a decision. Would I like to continue with another treehouse, or would I like to continue making this treehouse even more detailed and better? That's your opportunity. So after the first 5 minutes are done and you make this reflection, start your timer again and record 5 more minutes. And at the end of the 10 minutes total, what I'd love for you to do is to take a photo of your treehouse and put it online and post it for me so that I can see it and react to you and give you feedback about the treehouse that you've done. I think it would be really valuable for me to see that and to start to interact with you and also to answer any questions. And what I'm going to have you do is show your work on this keynote, this hashtag ISA 17 sketchnote. So if you tag it with ISA 17 sketchnote, I'll be watching that hashtag and looking for your sketchnotes of treehouses, and we can interact further. So please, at the end of the session, go ahead and do your work and post it online, and I look forward to interacting with you. So finally, Q&A again. You can reach out to me at RowDesign on Twitter or Instagram. I'm on both of those. Happy to interact with you and questions that you may have or treehouses that you'd like to share. And then finally, thank you so much for this opportunity to present this concept to you, and I hope that it's really helpful for you, especially as you listen to some great sessions at Interaction South America, that you can use these sketchnoting tips to take better notes and remember more so you can share it with your colleagues and remember it for yourself. Thanks so much.